found the source of the signal?
Asked Jared over the radio. I'm definitely getting closer. The readings are off the charts. Whatever's down there must be large. Mr. Lumic's certainly going to get his money's worth, shouted Dean as he trudged through the intense blizzard.
You better. Lumic sent us out here 2 months ago, and so far we've given him nothing,
retorted Jared disgruntledly. You know, the rest of us are just as annoyed as you are, Jared.
I don't buy that for a minute. I'm the only one of us who actually...
Here goes, thought Dean. Jared was the chief research scientist at Cybus Industries, and he made everyone know about it. He was working on an important scientific breakthrough in the use of Zeppelins more efficiently. Already every major company and billionaire had their very own palace in the sky over London, but Jared reckoned he could shave off the heavy fuel consumption, increasing the flight time and cost effectiveness dramatically. Unfortunately, he was taken off his project and sent to the South Pole, and resents every day they find nothing whilst his subordinates receive the credit for a breakthrough he was responsible for. The other members of the Polar Expeditionary Team couldn't sympathise much, as Jared's self-pitying meant striking up even a simple conversation would lead to him lamenting his situation for the next few hours.
I bet Kendrick would have taken my position by now, the smug.
Wait, I think I've found something, shouted Dean excitedly as he brushed away the thick snow from a buried sheet of metal. He knocked on the steel object, immediately regretting the resulting sharp pain in his hand. Whatever it is, it hurts, murmured Dean.
What was that?
Asked Jared. It's not hollow, or if it is, it must be really thick. There's no noticeable seams on the metal, no imperfections, continued Dean. He scanned the metal sheet over, wiping away more of the snowdrift that concealed it. Hey, what's this? Jared, there's some sort of logo, an insignia.
What's it depict? If it's good enough, Lumic will trademark it,
joked Jared, chuckling to himself. There's 2 eyes, but with, what looks like a teardrop in each corner, and a mouth, described Dean. All of a sudden, there was a muffled beeping noise.
That's time up, Dean,
said Jared.
You ought to get back before the suit heater runs out of its reserve. Steph is still waiting in the excavator south-southeast of your location.
Thanks, Jared, will do, replied Dean.
When we return in the morning, we'll bring all 3 excavators and dig it up,
reassured Jared as Dean started trudging back the way he had came, giving a final look back at the uncovered section he discovered before it disappeared into the late evening darkness. Somewhere deep underneath the snow, on the other side of a thick steel hull, an energy signal continued to emit a steady hum, and that night, whilst Dean was sleeping in the hub, he experienced a nightmare of metal men and a strong urging compulsion to return to the site. In the morning, the Polar team gathered for breakfast in the domed atrium. The rest of the group were eager to know of Dean's discovery, which the previous night he had put off talking about until he had gotten some rest. Stephanie, Caleb and Carrie all held the same rank as Dean and took rotational shifts in searching for the ominous signal which they had been sent there to locate. Naturally, each were disappointed that they had not found it themselves, but were still glad to have finally achieved the first part of their mission, meaning they were one step closer to returning home. So, asked Carrie, what was it like? What was it made of? It's metal, that's for sure, asserted Dean. Do you think the rumours are true then? You know, is it alien? Questioned Steph, referring to the worldwide myth that a skyship crashed close to the South Pole in the mid-80s, the news that Steph believed provided an explanation to the signal. How could he possibly know that from a section of metal? Chipped in Carrie. I think we shouldn't jump to conclusions, said Caleb. But I have to admit it's the only plausible option so far. Then Dean spoke up again. Well, let's ready the excavators and you can all come and have a look yourselves. Half an hour later, the crew were dressed in warm fur clothes and wore snow goggles to protect against the low morning sun, the reflection of which glistened off the freshly fallen snow. The snowstorm of the previous night had passed, and the air was clear and crisp. It's positively balmy out here, gestured Jared, as they heaved equipment onto the heavy loaders. They brought with them extraction gear as well as scientific instruments at Dean's suggestion. Today they planned on truly finding out what the bizarre object really was, and for that they needed to dig it up. Once all items were boarded, the team clambered aboard the Caterpillar trucks and set off. Caleb drew the short straw, so had to stay behind in the hub in case of an emergency and to monitor their progress. The large treads grinded to a stop once they had reached the site. The metal was once again mostly covered in snow, but its distinct silver sheen peppered the drift and caught Dean's eye once more. Immediately they set to work, offloading and setting up the scientific equipment, before using the smaller diggers to chip away at the blanket of snow. As the hours passed, they shoveled deeper and deeper, revealing that the metal section was part of what must be a larger cylindrical object, still only partially uncovered. Deep sonar scans detected that the object was too large to be fully dug out. "That's strange," said Stephanie with a confused look on her face. She bit her lip, a trait she exhibited when she was mulling over a problem. "Sorry, Steph, what was that?" asked Jared, looking up after pouring steaming coffee from his thermos flask. "None of our equipment can penetrate the walls." "Who says it's hollow?" suggested Jared. "The signal has got to be emitting from somewhere within. That means it must have an energy source and a transmitter," answered Steph. "Maybe the signal's just some sort of interference given off by metal this thick, like magnetism or radiation or..." "The signal hasn't decayed or fluctuated. Besides, neither of those could give off a signal strong enough that we could detect it several kilometers away." "Hey look, I'm just suggesting some more rational explanations given the readings," complained Jared defensively. All of a sudden, Jared and Stephanie were distracted from their conversation by Dean's eager shouting and Carrie's excited cheer. "We've got an opening!" repeated Dean ecstatically. Whilst Jared and Stephanie were occupied exchanging theories, Dean and Carrie had dug out more of the snow, revealing a hole in the side, evidently torn open from an explosion from within the vessel, as sheets of the thick metal curled and snaked out in odd directions. Beyond the opening they were greeted by an immediate darkness, punctuated by a light flicker of sparks flowing out of a cable suspended from the ceiling. "Spooky," commented Jared, after he and Stephanie had rushed over to peer inside. "We're gonna need these if we want to take a look inside," said Carrie, drawing out 4 electric torches from her utility belt and handing one to each of the others. Once equipped, they ventured inside the mysterious capsule. The interior was cold and dark. A constant dripping noise was heard, and every so often the floor and walls would vibrate and a deep rumble of creaking girders and engine phases would sound. "This place is vast," gasped Steph in wonderment. "There's no second guessing it now. We're in a capsule designed by intelligent alien life." "It could have been a secret project of a different country," pointed out Jared, "like the United States of Mexico or New Germany." "There's no way they're this far ahead of us in terms of technology," emphasized Carrie. "Dean, you're staying quiet. What do you think?" asked Jared. "Dean?" Dean was muttering to himself, beads of sweat on his forehead. Before any of the others could ask Dean why he was acting strangely, the floor beneath them gave a massive groan as cables snapped and it gave way. Steph and Dean fell meters before landing with a thud. Stephanie landed on her side, but Dean hit the ground first with his right leg, which buckled until he too was lying on the floor. "Steph! Dean! Are you alright down there?" asked a panicked Carrie. "We're fine, I think. Dean's leg has been fractured," shouted back Stephanie, as Dean groaned incoherently. Carrie and Jared let out a sigh of relief. "We left the climbing rope in the excavator," echoed Carrie's voice. "We'll go and get it. Stay there." And once again they were left in complete darkness. "Dean?" whispered Steph. There was no reply. She felt around for her torch in a sweeping motion. "Dean, I'm not just sitting here waiting for them to come and get us. I'm going to explore this level. You can stay and... No, I'm coming with you. My leg's not that bad," said Dean in a subdued voice, and he dragged himself to his feet. Once they had both found and activated their torches, they set off down the corridor. As they progressed, they tried to open each side door they came to, but their efforts to force them open or to find a control panel through which they could be opened were unsuccessful. "No power, no doors work. Great," complained Dean. They reached the end of the corridor and entered through a door which was partially open. The space they found themselves in resembled the bridge of an aircraft carrier. "This must be the primary control room," said Stephanie, amazed. "It must be a ship. Look, over there, a screen. Maybe if we restore some power, we can get it working and find out who it belongs to. How are we gonna do that? The power's completely dead, remember? All we've got are torch batteries and that's not enough, said Dean. But there's the signal, the one which brought us here. It must be powered by something. Steph, said Dean concernedly. If only we could find the source and reroute it. Steph, repeated Dean. Look over there. Steph's eyes glanced over in the direction Dean was pointing. Slumped against a bank of wires and controls was a body. They edged over to the figure. There were no signs of life. Once they had gotten close enough, they could see that the body was clad in a metal suit, a chest unit on its front, and a cloth covering the face. I wonder what these head tubes are for, whispered Steph. I've seen them before. In my dreams, muttered Dean. What are you talking about? Let's take off its mask, maybe they look like us. Stephanie reached out and tugged at the face cover. It's like it's fused with the skin, she said. She tried tearing it off, peeling away at the rotting flesh beneath, giving off a ghastly stench. Both of them recoiled in disgust. That's not a mask, is it? That's its face. On the surface, Jared and Carrie had gathered all the climbing rope they had so that they could rescue the other two and raise up Dean whilst making sure to not hurt his leg further. But when they returned and shouted into the darkness beyond the reach of the torchlight, only their own echoes bounced back to reply. What are we gonna do? Worried Carrie. Shall we go after them? No, replied Jared. We might get stuck down there too. We'll have to wait. But as he said this, a muffled noise came from the other side of the corridor. They spun around, but couldn't see anything. The noise persisted, and Jared thought he could make it out as a groaning noise. Dean, he said, turning to Carrie. They must have headed around and found some stairs up to this level. What are we waiting for? They might need our help, insisted Carrie. They dropped the climbing rope and started off down the corridor. They reached the end and were able to force apart a gap in a large door so that it became wide enough for them to squeeze through, and they jammed it open with a steel pipe they found on the floor. They shone their torch around the hangar-like space, filling it with what looked like operating tables with syringes and needles on long spindly metal arm stands. At the back wall there was a line of chambers with the same insignia on that Dean had encountered on the exterior. Just then, they detected movement in the corner closest to them, and the sound of metallic whimpering. Dean? Asked Carrie, as Jared walked forwards cautiously. He shone his torch upwards to illuminate the corner. A tall figure burst out at them and knocked Jared to the ground, concussing him. Carrie screamed as it lumbered after her. She tried to get to the door, but the monster grabbed her arm and dragged her back, clasping its hands around her throat. She started choking as the pressure increased. Carrie, get off her, you freak, pleaded Jared wearily. As his blurred vision returned to clarity, he started to make out the towering man. Good God, cried Jared. The pressure around Carrie's neck finally became too much as her bones crunched and her neck was broken. The creature dropped her lifeless body to the floor, deep red impressions where its fingers had grasped her. It turned towards Jared, an emotionless expression on its cloth-covered face and soulless black eyes. Jared tried to move, do anything, but he was too confused, too mesmerized, too scared. The metal giant dragged Jared onto the nearest operating table with ease and strapped him in, administering various coloured solutions despite Jared's protests.
I am too damaged. You must become like us.
It rumbled in a two-tone computerized voice as it started up the surgical machine, slowly removing parts of itself and attaching them to Jared. He screamed. As Dean and Steph reflected on their ghastly discovery, the terminals began to flicker with power, and the screen started to illuminate the dark room. Jared and Carrie, they must have activated some sort of auxiliary power system, surmised Dean. Damn it, the controls and readouts are in a different language, said Steph. I recognise this pattern though. It's a binary-based language system. similar to computer coding. She reached into her utility belt and produced a small calculator-sized device. It can be deciphered using UTF-8 code, assuming they have the same character system as us. It's a long shot, but maybe then we can figure out their language? There was a pause and her handheld translator buzzed. A look of surprise filled Steph's face. It translates to English! That would be impossible if it did come from outer space. There's always a terrestrial answer, Steph, said Dean assuredly, although deep in his mind he knew that he was wrong. Dean, look at this. The latest function that the system carried out was a scan of your brain. It must have reached out to you since you were the first to discover the ship, explained Steph. That's why it's now in English. This thing's inside my head? Said Dean, alarmed. That's why I've been having these headaches. I mean, if the transfer went two ways, it's possible by taking information it gave some back. That's all, said Steph, trying to calm him down. It worked, for now. The computer says that they were on a scouting mission for an invasion. They come from a distant planet, drifting far away from the warmth of our sun. A planet called Mondas, said Steph, her eyes wide in astonishment. This invasion must not have happened then. It's been 20 years since this ship crashed, if the myth is entirely truthful, said Dean. Some of the information is garbled, but it seems like they were once like us, but the need to survive pushed them into enhancing themselves cybernetically. Wait, what's that? Hissed Dean. Footsteps. Maybe it's Jared or Carrie, offered Steph, but they both knew that the heavy connection of metal on metal told them otherwise. Quickly, hide, said Dean, and they both scrambled behind a large control desk out of view from the doorway. The same type of creature as the body they found entered the room. It was far more terrifying, alive and walking. It surveyed the room, its movements precise and meticulous. Steph was shaking out of fear. She looked over at Dean. He had screwed up his face in pain and was muttering, "Get out of my head." Steph was about to tell him to be quiet, but just then his expression changed, and she was horrified to see a grin spread across his face as he started to laugh. At first a light chuckle, escalating until it was a roaring guffaw. There was a madness in his eyes. The creature moved in their direction and Steph closed her eyes, tears running down her face. Dean stood up and spoke to the metal giant. I've seen what you are. You've been whispering to me, in my dreams. Another outburst of laughter as the creature stood there. Well, I want to be like you. Make me stronger, faster, immortal. Improve me. Upgrade me. The creature grabbed him by the arm and pulled Stephanie up from behind the terminal. Its grip was strong and they could do nothing more than follow where it was taking them. What do you mean, make you like them? Asked Stephanie, appalled at the thought. That's what they do, explained Dean cheerily. They turn us into them.
That is correct.
The creature spoke.
I used to be like you, Dean and Stephanie.
How do you know our names? Gasped Stephanie.
Do you not recognize me? I was once known by you as Jared.
Stephanie broke down. What have they done to you? Oh, Jared, I'm so sorry, she cried.
Do not be sad. We will remove sadness. Soon you will be like me.
They reached the chamber and were forced inside. There was blood covering the operating table where Jared was converted. The remains of another metal giant littered the floor, and Carrie's body lay limp.
You will wait,
instructed the creature, and it let them go so it could prepare the two nearby operating tables. Run, Dean! Screamed Stephanie as she ran towards the door and out of the room. Dean followed, but when he reached the door, he kicked out the metal pipe keeping it open. You go on, he shouted. I've got a surgery appointment. As Steph ran through the corridor, she could hear Dean's insane laughter echoing throughout the ship. Soon the laughter turned into screams as tears streamed down Steph's face. I'm sorry, Dean. Stephanie hadn't remembered the route that the creature had taken them, so it only headed in a straight line. She reached the hole in the ship's hull from which they originally entered and stopped. She bit her lip, considering her options. If she left and got Caleb, Jared and Dean would find them and take them back. She needed to end this nightmare. She ran on, using the discarded climbing rope to climb down to the floor below, and headed to the control room. She accessed each of the control panels until she found the one that corresponded to the ship's power output. Down the corridor she could hear the sound of Jared and Dean's heavy metal footsteps. She sped up, trying to reroute systems and increase the power to cause an overload. The two steel nightmares entered the room as Steph manipulated the final sequence of controls.
Stop what you are doing,
ordered one of the two. Steph couldn't tell which was which. They both looked the same. Suddenly, sparks of electricity erupted from the control banks, shattering the screen and sending a lightning effect ricocheting around the room, electrifying the two metal men. Stephanie had worked out that a charged electrical outburst would be conducted through the ship, and more importantly, through the bodies of the men fused with steel. The machine had recruited them, making them stronger and tougher, but it betrayed them with their susceptibility to a simple electric shock. Stephanie, protected from the charge by her thick fur getup, collapsed to the floor, exhausted. A few hours later, Stephanie found herself back in the hub, wondering if the day's events had been nothing more than a terrible dream. Caleb looked up from having his head in his hands. "You're awake," he said. "I lost the group's radio signals as soon as you entered the ship. I waited for a couple of hours before my worrying got too much. I explored the ship trying to find you. I found Carrie first. I found you in that control room. At first I thought you were dead, like Carrie and those two metal things." He paused. "I couldn't find Jared or Dean." "The two bodies you found," began Steph weakly. "The steel suits." She began to well up. The look on Caleb's face told her that he understood. "I was able to get a message through the transmitter," he said, changing the conversation. "We should be rescued in a few days." That news gave Stephanie some relief. Over the next few days, Caleb helped Stephanie to recover from her trauma. In the afternoon of the third day, they heard a staccato rumbling noise and saw two large military-grade helicopters coming into view through the Antarctic mist. Once they had landed, Cybus Industries operatives emerged and headed over to Stephanie and Caleb. As they went to board their transport home, they noticed snowmobiles being offloaded from the second helicopter, and men in black Cybus security uniforms mounted them and sped off in the direction of the crashed ship. "What are they doing?" asked Stephanie. "Orders direct from Lumic himself. We are to retrieve any technology from the ship you encountered and bring it back to be researched," said one of the operatives in an authoritative tone. "That's madness," protested Caleb. "I told you what happened to the other members of our team. All their technology is useful for is butchering human bodies." "You can preach all you want, but we don't give the orders. We just make sure they're executed," said the operative dismissively, and with that he moved off, and Steph and Caleb were left to endure the journey home. A few months later, in a secret wing of Battersea Power Station, the primary Cybus factory, Chief Scientist Kendrick was nearing completion on the design CEO John Lumic had given to him. The experiments had been costly, but no one misses the homeless. Written at the top of the blueprints for his latest creation, Lumic had given their title, Cybus Men, then crossed it out in favour of something which would roll off the tongue more. Cybermen. Thank you for listening to this original audio narration, Cybus Origins. Written and read by Miles Tarrant. Set in the parallel world featured in Doctor Who from 2005 to 2010. If you enjoyed the story and would like to hear more like it, Please share the video, like and subscribe.